was Dabo's music again in the ACC, reclaiming his corners in the league and putting an end to division play in the ACC with how it's typically gone in division play, where the Atlantic Division ends up being victorious. Not that coastal teams haven't won the ACC Championship before. Pitt did it last year. Virginia Tech's done it in the past. But it really has been an Atlantic over coastal domination, mainly because Clemson and Florida State have been your two teams that have been on the national championship contender list. There hasn't been, in the history of the Atlantic Division and Coastal Division, there wasn't one national title contender to come out of the Coastal this entire time. Carolina could have flirted with it, because we talked about this a bit on Saturday while we were in Charlotte, Giglio. The biggest kick that have to kick themselves at Carolina is, had you not lost to Georgia Tech, if you had taken care of business against NC State, as I predicted, things were going to open up for you to at least get back in the conversation for the college football playoff. But you can't do that if you remove yourself, and that's what happened on Saturday.
I'm going to say something here about Carolina this season.
Sure.
And I watched them against Duke. I was impressed.
Yeah.
Drake May in particular. I think they were a product of their schedule this year.
Entirely possible.
Because they did not compete with Notre Dame.
Mm-mm.
They did not compete with Clemson. NC State beat them with a bunch of guys out. And Georgia Tech got them.
Can't explain.
Georgia Tech went 4-4 in the league, by the way.
They did.
They fought for Key, and that's how Key got the job.
Mm-hmm.
But you look through it, Virginia Tech's awful.
Mm-hmm.
Virginia's awful. Miami, that was the death rattle for Miami, losing at home to Carolina.
Yeah.
But you look back at who they beat.
And how they beat them.
And you're like, well, and I'm not sitting here telling you, well, they didn't play Louisville, they didn't play Florida State. No, I'm just saying, when you look at what they did, you're going, well, what did they do?
It's very similar to 2015, by the way.
No, because I'm going to give 15 credit.
The schedule was beneficial to them.
It was, but they went 8-0.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
The 6-2 number, when you look at it, you're going, they beat Wake. They went down there and they beat Wake. They did. Wake was in the tank by that point. But that was my big takeaway from Saturday was anytime the big boy pants were required this year from Carolina, they could not put them on.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of talk from the Carolina side about their recruiting, and there's a lot of talk from the Carolina side about all this progress that they've made. And every once in a while we get to, you know what? They're going to run away with this thing in the state. And it's like, Drake May had a hell of a first 10 games this year.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what happened in the last 3, but all of it starts up front, right?
It does start
and when you can't block and you can't run, it's trouble.
Let me ask you
this.
Trouble. I think this is more about, you can stack recruiting class on recruiting class. And that helps. I'm not helps.
knocking that part of it.
It's part of college football, all right? It's why I think Matt Rule, depending on how things might work out at Nebraska, can do that talent-wise. But at some point, you do have to develop.
You do.
And I think that's been Carolina's biggest problem under Mac Brown since he's come back. Recruiting's been great. And if you want to win your off-season recruiting conversations, then Mac Brown absolutely is worth his contract. But they're essentially the same team they were at the beginning of the season. I have not seen any sort of adapting to,
and their defense did get better. So I don't
know.
I don't want to shortchange that part of it.
No. I don't know if their defense got better as the season went on.
They were unorganized at the beginning of the year. To give up the 40 points in the quarter to App, they did make progress from that game. They did.
And then they got hurt. A bunch of guys got hurt.
Yeah.
But this gets back to my point about development. Everybody deals with that.
Injuries.
If you want to talk, we were missing key guys in the secondary and everything else, and maybe that's why it was possible for Cade Klubnik to take some of the shots that he did. I'm like, well, you just played NC State, who had also been dealing with some of that stuff as well. So let's not act. Oh, and speaking of secondaries, Clemson's secondary had also been banged up going into this game as well. So injuries are only going to take you so far. So I do think it's a valid criticism of North Carolina in the same way that there's a valid criticism for NC State and how they wanted to go out there and win games and that cost them by being way too conservative.
Backwards, yeah.
It's just as much fair criticism to look at Carolina and wonder, had you actually improved from game 1 to the ACC Championship game? And I'm not quite sure that they did.
I will say that I do believe defensively that they did.
Okay.
What I will say, though, about the offense is, and the questions about the offensive line last year were the same.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's not like you can snap your fingers. And even in the portal, how long did it take Florida State to figure out their offensive line?
Right.
Like, you talk about the voodoo in baseball, you talk about the voodoo in the World Cup. Like, offensive line is not an easy, quick fix. And that's what same thing with State. You know, State had 2 all-ACC offensive linemen? I don't think so, sir. But they got pushed around by Clemp, and so did Carolina. And you know what? You're right. Dabo reclaimed his corners. But now it's a big remix now for Dabo coming.
Well,
and we'll see what they do, because they need to go into the portal, and they need to get more better players.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they need to do.
That is a separate conversation about where Clemson goes with the way Dabo's been wanting to go do things. Mack Brown, head coach of North Carolina, addressed the media after the game Saturday and explained what went wrong in the ACC Championship.
I don't have any idea what they were. We want to win every game. As I've said, this team's been in the championship game twice ever since 2012. So that's a really, really good accomplishment. We lost 7 games last year, and we won 9 this year. So that's a tremendous amount of progress. We're playing one of the best teams in the country that, unless they lost by 1 point last week, they would be in the Final Four. So it shows you where we are, and we're making progress, but it also shows you what we've got to do to get better.
Well, they're going to have Drake May back. I know the transfer portal is pretty nuts right now, but Drake May, he's a legacy guy, and
he also stands to make $40 million in the spring of 24.
Yeah,
so he doesn't need money.
He's good. He's good. So he's back, and we'll see who he's going to be playing with. It looks like Josh Downs is not going to be coming back. It looks like he had every intention to at least go pro. We shall see. But here is Mack Brown on how Drake May will learn from the experience on Saturday.
Oh, Drake's the reason we're in the game. He's playing the best defense we've played all year by far.
Ooh,
it's one of the best defenses in the country, and we'll all grow from playing a great team. When you play a team spinning the playoffs every year for about 6 out of the last 8, I think, it shows you what you got to do to get where we want to go. And we're not there yet. We're better than everybody else because we got here, but we weren't better than they were. This was kind of like the Notre Dame game. They were physically better than we were, and they whipped us.
I don't know if I don't agree with Mack in terms of the best defense they saw this year.
No, listen, Clemson.
I don't know.
Clemson's front for sure.
Yeah,
and they have great linebackers as well. Sometimes I think Mack has a little subtlety to him. Knowing who they just played.
Yep. So no Clemson in the college football playoff. We do have Georgia versus Ohio State. We've got Michigan versus TCU. Good to see that TCU loses in their championship game, but sticks around. They weren't knocked out.
Overtime.
Yeah. In overtime. Once you go to overtime, at that point, what are you going to do, man? TCU, I think, accomplished enough this season that they belonged. You know who didn't belong?
You mean the one who would be favored over all of these teams if we played on a neutral site? Do you know who Vegas would think? Like Nick Saban, are you going to join Brent Musburger at the Mirage on Saturday night?
I get that Nick Saban has to go out there and say these things.